Welcome back to another video on the manager's seat. Now, there are many people who are new to Football Manager this year, as well as plenty of experienced players that would admittedly struggle with tactics, and I'm one of those. So in this video, we're going to go into some of the basics of pressing. In particular, we're going to have a look at what difference it makes to your play as you change the intensity of your pressing. So I've been playing Football Manager for almost 3 decades, but I still don't consider myself a tactical expert. In fact, like many of you, as I make changes to my tactical instructions, I'm not always convinced that I know how that's going to play out when the players retake the field. One of the things I'm really interested in is what kind of pressing intensity I should be asking my players to use in order for them to try and recreate the vision that I have in my head of the football I would like to play. Should I be asking them to press with much more intensity? Will that mean that they fly out of position and leave us very vulnerable? Or will it mean that they really harry the opposition and win the ball back effectively? If I drop this down to more often or to standard, how much less will my players press, and what will that look like? Will it mean that they just stand around doing nothing? Will it mean that they drop back into their formation and shape and are tougher to break down? Or will it mean that the opposition can play through us more easily? Well, here's what I think we're going to do in this video. We're going to arrange Arsenal into a simple 4-3-3 shape for a game that we're going to take charge of against Aston Villa. In fact, we're going to play the same game against Aston Villa twice, and we're going to try and diagnose exactly how the instructions that we're giving the players tactically is going to translate into how they play on the pitch. And so here's how our experiment is going to start. We're going to ask our Arsenal players to play a fairly aggressive pressing system. So we're going to push our defensive line and our line of engagement higher up, so we're described as a high pressing team. And in fact, we're going to use those same lines of engagement and defensive lines for both of these 2 games against Aston Villa. The only differences we're going to make to our 2 tactics is that in the first game, we're going to ask them to trigger the press much more often, which it says should increase the likelihood of the team triggering the press, and they will seek to disrupt the play at almost every opportunity. But what will that look like on the pitch? We're going to find out in a moment. And then in our second game, we're going to drop the pressing down to standard, which means that the triggering of the press will be set according to the team mentality, which for this game, we're going to leave up balanced. But we'll begin with closing down and triggering the press much more often. Let's see how that translates to our play on the field. So from the kickoff, let's put our pressing to the test. Let's see just how long it takes our players to go and pressurize the opposition and potentially win the ball back. If we pause with Mings there, you'd expect our front line, particularly Jesus, the centre forward, to now go in and try and put Mings under some considerable pressure. As it is, he backs off a little, and Aston Villa play the ball long, and we eventually win possession. With the intensity of our pressing set so high, one thing I'm interested to track is just how far from their regular positions players are prepared to roam to try and win back the ball. And I think we have an example of it here as we pause the ball with Coutinho in possession. Have a look at our right back Tomiyasu. At the moment, he's in the perfect position for a right back, but look how far he's prepared to stray from his post in order to try and chase the ball and close it down, eventually moving into a central midfield spot, leaving space in the area of the pitch he's vacated before he has to hurriedly rush back. In this next passage, we have another example of how far players will roam from their starting position to try and win possession when we have this intense press. The player to keep an eye on in this move is Tomiyasu, the right back once more. He is very much in a right back position as we pick up play with Bendia, but watch now as he decides to leave the man that in theory he should be marking, carry on pressing into the midfield, and eventually go so far towards the ball that he's going to let another man just over his shoulder run past him, and he could have been a goal threat. The way Tomiyasu is drawn to the ball means that Aston Villa now have 4 men essentially attacking just one defender who's playing them all onside. We're going to pick up the play with an Aston Villa throw-in, and this is going to be a good example of how effective the more intense pressing can be. Although we're not going to win the ball back, we are going to force the turnover, and persistently chasing after the ball is going to force Aston Villa to play long and give up possession of the ball. As they move it from man to man, you can see that each time somebody goes out there to try and pressurise them, even moving from midfield to try and press the centre-backs, and they eventually force it long. This next highlight is going to illustrate the same principle, but this time it's going to lead to an effort on goal. Look how much space McGinn seems to have as he picks up the ball in midfield. But it's the intensity of our pressing that means that rather than turn and try and craft a pass forward, he's forced to go back to Tyrone Mings. Jesus is then going to switch his attention to the Aston Villa centre-half, forcing him to kick the ball long, and we're going to be able to regain possession. Now it's this turnover that's eventually going to lead to a chance for us as we make our way up the pitch and into Jesus. He probably should have scored. Here Aston Villa in possession once more with their goalkeeper Martinez, and as they work the ball into their midfield, again we're going to put real pressure on the ball to try and win it back. Look how we've got two players going out to Buendia to try and win the ball back as he moves it into midfield again. Two players are on Ings trying to regain possession of the ball. They'll manage to win the tackle. We'll spring the ball to Saka and then Jesus, and we're on the attack once more. The one thing I am seeing more of, however, is just how far players are roaming to try and win possession of the ball, particularly defenders. This time it's a centre-back, and Saliba is the man that we're going to have to watch. Playing at centre-back, watch how far he's going to travel. First to close down Mings, but then as Mings goes backwards and in field, Saliba's tracking him all the way, and a ball in behind could lead to a chance to Aston Villa. Fortunately, as they play it forward, this time they're offside. Now for me, this next passage of play highlights perfectly what it means to have that pressing bar slid all the way to the right. Keep your eye on Jesus this time and track just how far he's prepared to go to try and win the ball back. He's following Tyrone Mings. He doesn't get near him initially, but then as Mings makes it all the way to the byline, Jesus is still going, and eventually he manages to win his tackle, turn, and play it back to the Arsenal goalkeeper. But does this come at a cost? Because as the move goes forward, look at Jesus struggling to try and get further up the pitch, and had he been on the halfway line when that move started, he might have got on the end of that chance. But of course this also has its advantages. This time Tamayasu's going to lose possession of the ball, and his instincts are to go and try and win it back again. He's going to follow Coutinho, and then even as the ball goes into midfield, he's going to decide to continue to chase and press, and then eventually he wins the ball back and goes through and has an effort of his own. So I felt like that game gave us a good insight into how our players will behave when we're asking them to trigger the press much more often. There were definite pros, but there were some elements that some of us might not be too keen on. So now let's have a look at what's going to happen to our play if we only trigger the press at a standard rate, meaning that our pressing is going to be set according to our team mentality of balanced. Will that mean that our play becomes too passive? Will it mean that we let the opposition have too much possession? Or will it allow us to keep a better shape and be more difficult to break down? I guess there's only one way to find out. Let's head into Aston Villa, take two. So we're going to join the action right from the Aston Villa kickoff, and I think you'll see that even with pressing set to standard, we're still fairly aggressive in our press. As we pause it here, you'll see that we've got both Martinelli and Jesus both harrying the opposition. And check out our central midfield players as well. They're also prepared to move further up in order to try and close down Douglas Luiz and try and win the ball back. We're still pretty early on in this contest, and I think I might have just seen my first evidence where our pressing does have a little less intensity. They're going to play the ball to Tyrone Mings in the defence, who will feed Digne again, and Digne's going to set off down the wing. And now we've got two players chasing him, but not really going to try and put a tackle in, and he has an easy pass to Coutinho. And look at the pressure we then put on him. We go towards him, but it's not like we're doing it with any great conviction, and he manages to get across into the box. And we might have further evidence of that lack of intensity here, as Ings is going to move the ball back to Mings in defence. And just watch Martinelli's reluctance to go and engage him. Instead, he kind of makes a half-hearted movement towards him, but doesn't look to go at him with any great conviction. And then as Mings moves the ball over to one of his central defender counterparts, look at Jesus preferring to stay in more of a midfield position really, rather than go towards the ball to close it down. Here's more good evidence, I think, of how we're just going to allow Aston Villa more time on the ball. We've sent the ball down to Martinelli. He can't get to it. Digne mops up. Martinez has the ball. And look at how much more time we're now giving each of the Aston Villa players on the ball. We're not really going towards them with any great urgency. Certainly we don't have more than one man trying to close down the ball, and we're giving them a lot more time to pick out their passes. However, it's possible that by lowering the intensity of our pressing, we might just be asking our players to maintain their shape a little bit more. This time you can see that Aston Villa striker Danny Ings is going to drop off right into midfield to receive the ball. Now, in our previous game against Aston Villa, we noticed how Saliba would vacate his position in central defence on more than one occasion in order to go and try and press one of the strikers. Well, this time, he's just going to stay in position. And as Ings turns and tries to play a through ball, it's Saliba that's there to try and mop up the danger. Although with the pressing set to standard, when the ball is there to be won, our players will do it. We have the possession of the ball here. You'll see that John McGinn is going to steal it from us. But look at Martin Odegaard. When the ball is near him, he will make every effort to try and close it down and win it back. He just doesn't need to go too far in order to try and regain possession of the ball. And in this next highlight, I think you can see why that might be an effective strategy. Aston Villa are going to have the ball on their own back line, and we're not going to press them with too much intensity or urgency. Instead, we're going to let their defensive players just have the ball whilst we maintain our defensive shape. And it means that Aston Villa are forced to go long, and we find it pretty easy to regain possession. On this occasion though, I think you can see the same principle, but this time counting against us. Zinchenko is going to be dispossessed. They're going to break, and the man to keep an eye on this time is Thomas Partey, who has the opportunity to commit and go and try and win the ball. Instead, he decides to maintain his position and defensive shape. And at this point, he could go and harry Watkins, get closer to him, try and win the ball. Instead, he decides to just run back towards his own goal, and instead Zinchenko comes in and makes the foul. About halfway through the first half, Arsenal are about to take the lead from a corner, but it's actually the pressing that's going to score the goal for us. As they head the ball away, you'll see that Coutinho has got quite a bit of space, but he has two men near him, and they both feel that they are close enough to the action in order to vacate their position and go and try and close down the ball. And it actually is going to lead to a goal for Jesus as we manage to win the ball back, slip the ball to Jesus on the edge of the box, and he curls home an effort that was scored because of the pressure we applied. So after watching both games, I think I'm now considering the pressing slider as creating almost like a perimeter around each player. And the more you increase the intensity of your press, the further each player will move in order to try and win back the ball. And this will inevitably create areas of the pitch where multiple members of your team may be pressing in the same vicinity. Now that we've played the match against Aston Villa using both systems, we can compare the match stats from the game. Now obviously we shouldn't draw conclusions based on just one fixture, but the possession stats from the game were interesting. When we were pressing much more often, Arsenal had just 51% of the ball over the 90 minutes, whereas when pressing was set to standard, that possession rose to 60%. And there was one other stat that jumped out over the course of this match, and that was the passes completed. When Arsenal were pressing much more often, you can see that they attempted 502 passes during the game, whereas when pressing was set to standard, they attempted more than 100 more passes. And perhaps the other major difference, as we might have anticipated, was in the number of high-intensity sprints. When we were pressing much more often, we attempted 150 during the match. When we were on standard pressing, that dropped to 126. Of course, these differences could be explained by where we're winning the ball back with each approach. With standard pressing, we might be winning the ball closer to our own goal, meaning that we need to make more passes before we approach the opposition's goal, thus meaning that we've got greater percentage of possession. I then played an additional 4 fixtures with each of our 2 tactical approaches just to see whether there were any stats differences between asking the players to press much more often and asking them to press standard. And you can see that after 5 games with each approach, there is a definite difference when it comes to the number of presses attempted per 90 minutes. You can see Bukayo Saka is the anomaly. He attempted more pressures and the pressing was set to standard, and for Thomas Partey they were broadly similar, but for most other players you can see that they were attempting far more pressures per 90 minutes when we had the pressing intensity set to much more often. And we have a similar difference between the 2 approaches when it comes to how many times each player won possession per 90 minutes. In the defence, this time Zinchenko is the outlier. He won possession more times per 90 minutes on a standard press, but all of the other defenders won it back more frequently when we were pressing much more often. Throughout the rest of the team, you can see that not only were they attempting to press more often per 90 minutes, but they were also winning back possession more often per 90 minutes too. Hopefully that little experiment has given you some insight into how your players might behave differently depending on how far to the right you're prepared to push that pressing slider. If you're interested in other tutorials to aspects of Football Manager, let us know which ones down in the comments below. And if you want to have a deeper look at pressing, check out this video next.